Welcome everyone to today's devotion. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and after today we are officially halfway through one of the longer books of Paul, one of his longest letters. So again, the New Testament in particular isn't as long as we often think it is. But with that said, chapter 8 is one of those chapters that without some historical, cultural, social backdrop behind it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, particularly to a modern audience. And it has to do offering food to idols. Now, granted, you and I, we don't do that. If I go to the store and buy something, I don't bring it home, put it on a mantle, offer it bacon and eggs, and fall down and worship it. That's not the world we live in. And we have idols. Our culture is equally polytheistic as ancient cultures. You think about it. If you walk into a living room, and what is everything centered around? Everything is centered around the TV, which is the source of entertainment, especially in the middle of pandemic. The number one thing that sells a home is not that living room or the fireplace or the bedrooms. It's actually the kitchen. How many times have we been to, let's say, a ball game, and we all stand in unison and sing and chant as if we were in worship, singing a hymn with our hands raised and everything else. We live in an age that is obsessed with eroticism, sexuality, and everything else to the point that you can't escape it. I've often said the three more obvious idols is sex, power, and entertainment. If you think about it, much of our politics is entertainment. Two of the last four Republican presidents have been TV personalities. Every Democratic candidate and president has to go to Hollywood to win their vote. Not to mention that our most recent president has a Netflix deal, everything like that. So much of politics is now drama, and the way the media portrays politics is through the lens of drama. He said, she said, can you believe this, all of that sort of stuff. The debates themselves are more for entertainment value than they are for information. But how much of entertainment has been politicized, right? So you can't make a movie about fighting robots. You have to make a movie about fighting robots trying to find themselves in their struggle with gender identity, right? It's everything has to be politicized. So if your fighting robots aren't woke, then they're not acceptable. And so particularly biopics, every review of a biopic is, well, you didn't explore his sexuality enough, you didn't explore his identity enough, right? And so our obsession with power and sex and entertainment. And so sex has been politicized, entertainment's been politicized, politics has been entertainized, sex has been entertainized, right? And so our world is very polytheistic. Now, the world by which Paul and the early Christians inherited was very polytheistic, just more overtly polytheistic. So you have temples in the middle of the city, and people called to come and worship in those temples. And part of the worship would be to offer food in that context. But as you can imagine, the idols don't actually eat the food, right? This is all part of a sacrifice, right? You're going to offer something, much the way Abel would have offered something. But what do you do with that food after it's been offered? Well, one of the things that would be done is that the food would be sold in the marketplace, and it would be sold at a discount price. So your options are, here's your ribeye steak. You can have it, for $10, I don't know, or you can have it for $5. And if it's the same steak, same quality, everything, why would you pay 10 when you could pay 5? Well, the answer is because if you're buying the cheaper steaks, are you guilty of idol worshiping? Are you contributing to that market? And so quickly, it raises a number of difficult ethical issues. And so remember what we've seen in the last few chapters is that the Corinthians have written a letter to Paul saying we're divided on a lot of these things. This is an ethical and a theological issue. Now, there are some in the church who say, look, we just shouldn't have anything to do with this. I think as a believer in Christ, we should just pay the extra $5 and get the more pure steak. And others would say, look, I came from that world. I was one who was offering those sacrifices because I believed that it would make my life better and that I would find salvation and all that sort of stuff. And the last thing I need is to come into the church and come to find that everyone around me is participating in that. In a more moral sense, yes, but still, I just need a clean break from that. And then there are others who are saying, look, it's a fake God. And look, if they're dumb enough to sell me discounted meat, that's their problem. I'm going to eat it because my identity is not in the food I eat, but in the God I worship. Well, we have issues like this today, don't we? Perhaps the most prominent one right now is the mask issue. And so if you're a person who wears masks all the time, maybe you have felt pressured from even believers saying, well, you're not living by faith, or you're giving in to the man, or something like that. But if you're one who, on the other end, who is less comfortable wearing a mask all the time, I just saw a news headline that a Wisconsin government or company, I think it was a city government, I think in Wisconsin, I can have my details wrong, they're requiring even on Zoom calls that their employees wear masks, when they're at home alone, right? And so if you're uncomfortable wearing masks for stuff like that, well, you may have felt the criticism saying, well, don't you love your neighbor, right? Don't you care about the good of others and the health of others? What about those who are particularly vulnerable, right? And so within the church, what you have is people who have good reasons for the decisions they make. And I would say even biblical reasons for the decisions they make. So how do we live with one another? How do we navigate these waters? Of course, mask wearing is the more recent one. Christians have had debates over a lot of things, whether it be music, and not just the style of music we worship with. What about music outside of the church? Right? And there's if I'm listening to music in my car, one of the things I do when I pull into a home or a church property or something like that, I just turn it down, right? Because there's some disagreements over this. What about movies and forms of entertainment? What about your voting record, like who you vote for and some of your political positions? Like, can there be room for agreement among our disagreements? And so Paul gives us a real model here. And in order to understand it, I think Dr. Albert Mohler's his trajectory is quite helpful, where he says basically you could divide theology into three categories. There's the primary, secondary, and tertiary. And just the primary doctrines are ones that define Christianity: the Trinity, creation, salvation, resurrection, stuff like that. The secondary doctrines are ones that we may disagree with quite significantly, to the point that maybe we should clarify denominations, but we affirm the primaries. And so baptism would be one of these. Church government would be another one of these. And so Baptists and Presbyterians and Methodists and others, we agree on the fundamentals of the faith. But we disagree on some of the secondary issues, not gospel issues, but biblical issues nonetheless. Now, I believe in being open about those disagreements allow us to be more focused on our agreements. So if I'm new to an area, I don't believe in paedo baptism. I believe in believers' baptism, credo baptism. So I want to go to a church where they're not going to try to baptize my baby, right? Or pressure my kids to be baptized, right, as kids, but rather I want them to be baptized as believers in Christ. And so, but once we have that agreement, Presbyterian and I sit down, we have a disagreement over this, then we can say, with that aside, right, we're open about that, we're honest, and we know why. Let's focus on the mission of the cross. Tertiary issues, I think the end times fall in that. We've talked about that in our study of Matthew and Luke. And if we ever get to Revelation later this year, we'll do the same thing there. I think there's a host of other issues. But then I think there's issues like this. The primary issues define Christianity. Secondary issues may define a denomination or a church. Tertiary issues, I think, within a church, you should be able to say we agree to disagree, but we still love one another, contribute to one another, and build each other up to be closer like Christ. And this is one of those issues. So, verse 1, now concerning food offered to idols. I'm going to skip down to verse 4. Therefore, as to the eating of food offered to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence, that there is no God but one. Notice how Paul begins with the primary issues, right? Here's the theological reality. An idol is nothing real, okay? One of the things that the Old Testament does is actually mock idol worshippers. God in Isaiah 44 mocks people who grabs an axe, cuts down a tree, fashions a statue out of the wood, puts it up on the mantle, and says, "Please save me, O God." Right? God mocks them. He literally laughs at them. And Paul is picking up on some of that, saying, look, we know that they're not real. It's not real. I mean, how many people, you really think about it, their emotional state is determined on the success of their favorite sports team. Right? And if the owner doesn't fire the coach, if they don't get this star recruit, whatever, well, I just don't know if I can have dinner with my family tonight. Right? Think about really just how silly that is, how really goofy that is. How many of us will spend hours doing research on this policy and that policy, and we get worked up if we discover our coworker disagrees with our research? You mean to tell me you don't think this is the right policy for our country, our state, our city, whatever? And we get really worked up. Why? Because we've taken a good thing and we turn it into a God thing. And Paul starts with that initial thing. Look, it's not real. It's not a real God. It's a box that projects visuals. It's a system that tries to govern people that is imperfect and broken by default. It's a hope you've placed on in pleasure and desire, and it won't bring you any of it. It's not real. And so when we grasp that, right, so whenever we deal with these tertiary issues, we have to state clearly what is at stake and what isn't at stake. And then he lays out sort of how he wants them to approach it, starting at verse 7. It's actually a really short chapter. However, not all possess this knowledge, but some, through former association with idols, eat food as really offered to an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. Now, notice what Paul has done here. He does this in Romans, and we saw back then, at least chapter 14. I could be wrong on the reference. And in other places where Paul says, look, there are strong Christians and there are weak Christians. A strong Christian is one saying, I recognize the difficulty here, but I am free in my Christian liberty to participate in, to avoid whatever. And then there are weak Christians who, because of perhaps their association with it, are uncomfortable participating in it. So if you have someone who has come out of Judaism, right, that's the issue in, I believe, Galatians, where there is a clear dietary law. And so you think, okay, now I've embraced Christ. That doesn't mean I'm just going to start eating bacon. My whole life I've understood that there is a spiritual connection between your food and your soul. Right? Now you can disagree with that. I love bacon, so I would be a strong Christian in that regard. Right? And Paul says, look, there are those who are weakened because of their close association prior to their conversion to this issue. He says, look, if you're a strong Christian, and this isn't an issue with you, you need to be sympathetic to those areas. So he says, verse 8, food will not commend us to God. We are no worse off if we do not eat, no better off if we do eat. He's saying, guys, we're at the end of the day, we're talking about food here. It's just food. Food is been given to us by God. Yes, there's a spiritual connection, and we've talked about that, about our appetites and our stomachs and our passions. But at the end of the day, it's food. Its purpose is to keep you alive, to give you energy, stuff like that. Yes, but it's just food. And so Paul here would represent the stronger Christian. Verse 9, but take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged if his conscience is weak to eat food offered to idols? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brother and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. That's the key issue, isn't it? That's the key issue. Is it comes down to your freedom is not a license to be a jerk. And so whatever the issue is, and so look, if my local Save-A-Lot wants me to wear a mask, okay, I'm not going to walk in and say, look here, look, I'm willing to take it on, and you guys are nothing more than puppets of the government. Right? Well, now I'm a jerk. This is one of the things that a lot of conservatives struggle with. Like, saying you won't participate in political correctness, like, I can get on board with that, but what I can't get on board with is saying that now gives you a license to be a jerk and to say anything without even considering how that might be perceived or how it may wound other people. So using Christian liberty is a biblical idea, but not as a means of hurting people. And so if you are comfortable in a certain area, but you realize that this may be a source of weakness for other people, then just don't do it. It doesn't make you a slave. It makes you a stronger person. That you are sensitive to the spiritual needs of other people. So maybe it is food, maybe it's certain clothes, maybe it's certain music or entertainment, or there's a host of other issues. Maybe that's not an area of weakness for you, and you have real Christian freedom, not manufactured Christian freedom, but real Christian freedom. If so, then glory be to God. But if you dare use that to weaken the conscience of another believer, particularly a new believer, then God's judgment upon you. The whole point here is love your neighbor. Because you may be strong in this one area of Christian liberty, you may be weak in other areas. That's certainly true in my life. And so I think there's some real good practical points here, especially amid pandemic. Are we going out of our way to demonstrate love to one another or not? And if we're not, we've got a lot of areas of repentance in our life. And I trust we'll do it. Lord willing, we'll see you guys here tomorrow.